What percentage of students score near the average, and how many scores are actually rare? Believe it or not, you can estimate all of that instantly without a calculator using one simple rule. The empirical rule, which is also called the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, applies to normal distributions and tells us exactly how data is spread around the mean. Three numbers are all you need to remember. 68%, that is, about 68% of the values fall within 1 standard deviation of the mean. 95%, that is, about 95% of the values fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean. And 99.7%, because about 99.7% of the values fall within 3 standard deviations of the mean. Therefore, almost all data falls within 3 standard deviations of the mean. In a normal distribution, the data clusters symmetrically around the mean. So if we look at a normal curve, this is a bell-shaped curve, and it is symmetric. The total area under the curve is 1. Therefore, we would have 50% of the values below the mean. We have the mean right here at the center, and 50% of the values above the mean. So when we say that about 68% of the values fall within 1 standard deviation of the mean, we would have 34% 1 standard deviation below the mean, and 34% from the mean to 1 standard deviation above the mean. And therefore, if we go one more standard deviation below the mean, we will add another 13.5%, and then 1 standard deviation to 2 standard deviation above the mean, another 13.5%. So when you add 34 plus 34, that's your 68, plus the 13.5 plus 13.5, that will be 95%. And now, from 2 standard deviation to 3 standard deviation below the mean, there will be another 2.35%, and similarly, since the curve is symmetric, the same thing will occur between 2 standard deviation and 3 standard deviation above the mean. So if you add all of these percentages up, you will get 99.7%. Let's look at our first example. In this case, the mean is 100 and the standard deviation is 10. And we want to find about what percent of values are between 90 and 110. Well, in order to figure this out, we would need to calculate how many standard deviation from the mean are the values 90 and 110. So if we do 100 minus 10, that will be 1 standard deviation below the mean. And 100 plus 10, that will be 110, which is 1 standard deviation above the mean. Therefore, about 68% of the values will fall between 90 and 110 because these values are 1 standard deviation of the mean. Now, if we have the same mean 100 and standard deviation 10, the question asks about what percent of values are between 80 and 120. So since our standard deviation is 10, 80 is 2 standard deviations below the mean. If we do 100 minus 2 times 10, that will be 80. And if we do 100 plus 2 times 10, that will be 120. So these values are 2 standard deviation below and above the mean respectively. Therefore, about 95% of values will fall between 80 and 120. So only about 5% of values are outside this range, already quite uncommon. Now we still have the same mean, 100, standard deviation is 10, and the question asks about what percent of values will fall between 70 and 130. So 70 is 3 standard deviations below the mean because that's 3 times 10, which is 30. And 130 is 3 standard deviation above the mean. So about 99.7% of values fall in this range. Anything outside, like below 70 or above 130, is extremely rare. These are true outliers. The empirical rule maps directly onto z-scores, giving you an instant sense of how unusual any value is. If the z-score is between -1 and +1, we'll say that the value is common, that is the core majority of any normal data set, and it falls within the central 68%. If the z-score is between -2 and +2, about 95% of values will fall within that range, so therefore it captures nearly all typical values. However, if the z-score is less than -2 or greater than 2, that will be considered an unusual value because it is outside the 95% band and only about 5% of the values land there. Now, if the z-score is between -3 and +3, almost everything or all the values will fall in that range. But if it is less than -3 or greater than +3, it would be considered very rare because only less than 0.3% of the data will fall there. Now you can look at any normal distribution and instantly estimate where most values fall. No calculator required. That's the power of the empirical rule. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to keep learning with us. And don't forget, math success starts when you stay on the fast track.